What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? In Exodus 20, verse 8, depending upon which version you have, it says something similar to, remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. That's from the Scriptures. Or the King James has, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And the Tanakh that I read from every week says, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. So depending upon which version you have, we're told to sanctify it, to set it apart, or to keep it holy. Many people think that the first mention of the Sabbath is in Exodus 20 during the account of the giving of the Ten Commandments. It's not the case. When first going into the wilderness, the children of Israel were commanded each day to gather enough bread to eat, or the manna to eat for one day. Exodus 16, starting in verse 16. This is the word of which Yahweh has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's needs, an omer for each being, according to the number of beings. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered, some more, some less. And they measured it by omers. And each who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered according to his need. And Moshe said, let no one leave any of it until morning. And they did not listen to Moshe. So some of them left part of it until morning. And it bred worms and stank, and Moshe was wroth with them. So on the first through the fifth day, any manna was left over that day would turn rancid. But the manna gathered on the sixth day was different. Exodus 16:23. And he said to them, this is what Yahweh has said. Tomorrow is a rest, a Sabbath set apart to Yahweh. That which you bake, bake, and that which you cook, cook, and lay up for yourselves. All that is left over to keep until morning. And they laid it up till morning, as Moshe commanded. And it did not stink, and no worm was in it. And Moshe said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to Yahweh. Today you will not find it in the field. Gather it 6 days, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there is none. And it came to be that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found none. And Yahweh said to Moshe, how long will you refuse to guard my commands and my Torah? See, because Yahweh has given you the Sabbath, therefore he is giving you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Let each one stay in his place, and do not let anyone go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. While Exodus 16 may be the first time the seventh day rest was referred to as the Sabbath, it is not the first time resting on the seventh day is mentioned. Genesis 2:2. And on the seventh day Elohim completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim in creating had made. So we see that the Sabbath day of rest had been around since creation.
You think he rested by himself?
No. The idea of rest is closely tied to the Sabbath. We are told in Genesis 2:2 that Yahweh rested on the seventh day. The Israelites were told in Exodus 16 not to gather manna on the seventh day. In essence, they were to rest. Yahweh gets much more specific in Exodus 20. Exodus 20:10. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. In Leviticus 23:3. 6 days work is done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath rest, a set-apart gathering. You do no work. It is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwellings. We are told here that the Sabbath is not just for the Israelites, but for their servants and their animals. How is this applicable to us now? While I don't know anyone who has servants, it's my conviction that this extends to anyone that would do work for me. Contractors, anyone doing any repairs, wait staff, etc. While I can't control what day a repair shop may work on anything I have, I can control what day I bring it to them and what day I pick it up. I can control what day I go to a restaurant, and I can definitely control when contractors at my house working. This is not always easy. It does take some planning. Remember in Exodus 16, they were told to gather a double portion of manna on the sixth day. Likewise, we may have to take special preparations on Friday. Make sure our car's got enough gas to make it to service. Make sure we have all the things we need for meal items, etc. for Sabbath. It's not something new that just affects us now. If you go to Mark 15:42, and when evening had come, because it was the preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So once again, it's not something new just for our time. They were doing this, back in the time of Yeshua. They knew Sabbath was coming, so they prepared on Friday. How important is the Sabbath? We are told that observance of the Sabbath is one of the signs that we are His set-apart people. Exodus 31, starting in 12. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, And you, speak to the children of Israel, saying, My Sabbaths you are to guard by all means, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generation, to know that I, Yahweh, am setting you apart. We're given a few specifics on what we are to do or not to do on the Sabbath. One of them comes in Exodus 35:3. Do not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. Our brother Judah has taken this commandment to the nth degree, to the point where the rabbis say it's unlawful to do things like driving or turning on a light switch on the Sabbath. Their argument is that an internal combustion engine operates by creating thousands of explosions or fire every minute to give the engine power. Turning on a light switch, they argue, completes an electrical circuit, which is considered building, which is work and therefore prohibited. While I disagree with their logic, I do not find fault with them for trying to observe the command. And you think, in the case of kindling a fire, if you think back to the days of the Torah, there were no Bic lighters. To kindle a fire took considerable work. If you've never tried it, I recommend it. Even with modern tools, such as the magnesium fire kits, it's not easy. It is still work. That being said, my house will still refrain from kindling a fire on the Sabbath, even if we can start a fire simply as pulling a trigger on a lighter. If we're running behind and can't get our menorah lit because Sabbath has already started, we just don't light it. We're not commanded to light candles just prior to Sabbath. It's only a tradition. Although it's a nice tradition, a nice way to set it apart from other days, we are not commanded to do it. We are, however, commanded not to start a fire. We're told several times not to work on the Sabbath, as mentioned earlier. We are also caused not to cause our children or servants to work on the Sabbath. Nehemiah recounts where the people of Israel made a vow not to buy from foreigners on the Sabbath. In Nehemiah 10, and that if the peoples of the land bring wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath or on a set-apart day, and we would not forego the seventh year in the interest of the land, in interest of heavy hand. Nehemiah then chastises Israel for once again breaking the commands on the Sabbath. Nehemiah 13:15. In those days I saw in Yehuda those who were treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, and figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they had brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I warned them on the day they sold food, and men of Seor dwelt there, bringing in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Yehuda and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Yehuda and said to them, What evil matter is this that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do the same, so that your Elohim brought all this evil on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Yisrael for profaning the Sabbath. Here we're told that those working in the fields and those buying and selling on the Sabbath were profaning the Sabbath. If in that time of Nehemiah it was considered profaning the Sabbath to buy and sell, why would it be any different today? We are told that those who keep the Sabbath will be blessed. Isaiah 56, starting verse 1. Thus says Yahweh, Guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of the man who lays hold on it, guarding the Sabbath, lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the sons of the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, Look, I am a dry tree. For thus said Yahweh, to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbaths, and have chosen what pleases me, and hold fast to my covenants, to them I shall give in my house and within my walls a place and name better than that of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh, to serve him and love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and hold fast to my covenant, them I shall bring to my set-apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my altar, for my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. Here we are told that those who are not natural-born Israelites, but choose to do what pleases Yahweh, will have in his house a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. He gives them an everlasting name that is not cut off. While we are told not to work on the Sabbath, we are also told it is not to be a day full of play either. In Isaiah 58:13, if you do turn back your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasures on my set-apart day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the set-apart day of Yahweh esteemed, and shall esteem it, not doing your own ways, or finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words, then you shall delight yourself in Yahweh, and I shall cause you to ride on the heights of the earth, and feed you with the inheritance of Jacob your father, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. Years ago, when we were keeping the Sabbath at home by ourselves, we started to go to the beach, thinking it would be a good day to rest, relax, and enjoy the Sabbath. One such Sabbath, we were headed home, and one of the boys suggested we stop and get something. I don't remember if it was a pizza or rent a movie or what it was. But the point is that by spending the day playing at the beach, they had forgotten it was Sabbath. So we stopped spending Sabbath at the beach. In retrospect, there was a loading of the car with the chairs, umbrellas, sand toys, etc., then lugging all that stuff down to the beach, then lugging it back up to the car. So there was some level of work involved. Jeremiah discusses carrying burdens on the Sabbath. Jeremiah 17, thus Yahweh said to me, go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, by which the sovereigns of Yehudah come in and by which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and you shall say to them, hear the word of Yahweh, you sovereigns of Yehudah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem who enter these gates. Thus says Yahweh, guard yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem, nor take a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, nor do any work. And you shall set apart the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they did not obey, or incline their ear, and they made their necks stiff to not hear and to not receive instruction. And it shall be, if you diligently obey me, declares Yahweh, to bring in no burden through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, and to set apart the Sabbath day to do no work in it, then sovereigns and heads sitting on the thrones of David shall enter through the gates of this city, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their heads, the men of Yehudah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And this city shall be inhabited forever. And they shall come from the cities of Yehudah and from the places around Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the low country, from the mountains and from the south, bringing burnt offerings and slaughterings and grain offerings and incense, bringing offerings of praise to the house of Yahweh. But if you do not obey me to set apart the Sabbath day, and do not bear a burden when entering the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I shall kindle a fire in its gates, and it shall consume the places of Jerusalem and not be quenched. Our brother Judah has rules that state that they cannot carry more than a certain amount on the Sabbath day. I couldn't find a reference, but was once told that it was prohibited for a man to carry his talit on the Sabbath. That's the, prayer shawl, so they were told that, just to carry something that small was violating. So they have lockers at the synagogue, which they use to store the talit. Is this taking it to an extreme? Some will say yes, others will say no. I know a talit weighs far less than the beach chairs I used to drag around. I think once again it comes down to the definition or disagreement of what constitutes work. This disagreement is nothing new. Yeshua went through the same thing in his time. There are many accounts of him disagreeing with the Pharisees about something. These disagreements are what people use to say that Yeshua did away with the Torah. A short study will show that in all these cases, Yeshua is not disagreeing with them over a command of the Torah, but a command the Pharisees had instituted on their own. Matthew 12:1. At that time, Yeshua went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. He and his taught ones were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your taught ones are doing what is not right to do on the Sabbath." Here the Pharisees were saying the disciples were violating the prohibition to harvesting on the Sabbath. The difference between what the disciples were doing that was prohibited was that they were not harvesting large amounts of grain, only enough to, satisfy their immediate hunger. In Mark, we have another example of Yeshua chastising the Pharisees about one of their man-made laws. In Mark 7, verse 1, "And the Pharisees and some of the scribes assembled him, having come from Jerusalem, and seeing some of his taught ones eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Yehudim do not eat unless they wash their hands thoroughly, holding fast to the traditions of the elders. And coming from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions which they have received and hold fast, the washing of cups and utensils and copper vessels and couches. Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, 'Why do your taught ones not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands?' And he answered, said to them, 'Well did Yeshayahu prophesy concerning you hypocrites, as it has been written, this people respect me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as teachings the commands of men. Forsaking the command of Elohim, you hold fast to the traditions of men.' And he said to them, 'Well do you set aside the command of Elohim in order to guard your tradition?' In temple times, there were elaborate rules in conjunction with ritual impurity. If a person had been rendered impure through having come into contact, say, with a dead rodent, he contaminated sacred food such as the tithe given to the priest, which must then not be eaten. The way in which the contamination of this kind could be removed was through the immersion in a ritual bath. But the sages imposed, in certain circumstances, a minor form of contamination known as hand contamination, in which only the hands, not the whole body, was contaminated. And for this to be removed, total immersion was not required, only the ritual washing of the hands. Since there was a good deal of priests, tithe in ancient Palestine, which could easily come into contact with the hands, the sages eventually ordained that the hands of every Jew, not only the hands of a priest, must be washed ritually before meals. The procedure is to pour water from one cup or glass, first twice over the right hand, then twice over the left hand, care being taken that the unwashed hands do not touch the water used for the washing. The hands are then dried with a towel before partaking of the meal. A benediction is recited over the washing of the hands. Blessed are you, Yahweh our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified with us the commandments and has commanded us concerning the washing of the hands. So once again, this was something that the Pharisees instituted over and above the Torah. And that's what they were getting on to Yeshua and the disciples about is, hey, your people, your disciples, they don't follow, they don't wash their hands. It's not that their hands were dirty and they didn't clean them. It's they didn't do this ritual thing that the Pharisees said, hey, you had to do. But once again, it was a man-made law that they weren't doing, so there wasn't anything wrong with it. Not to say that all work is specifically prohibited. Accidents happen and we cannot schedule them. There are some professions that need to have people working on the Sabbath. Law enforcement, emergency medical personnel, firefighters, and armed forces are a few that come to mind. These professions are working or on call to serve the communities in times of need and to help people. There's nothing wrong with this. Yeshua himself confirmed this when he said, when the Pharisees thought that they were going to trick him into breaking the Sabbath, in Matthew 12, starting in 9. And having left there, he went to their congregation, and see, there was a man having a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, is it right to heal on the Sabbath? So as to accuse him. And he said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, shall not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more worth is a man than a sheep? So it is right to do good on the Sabbath. The idea is that protection of life always takes precedence. Not that I'd schedule any elective procedures on the Sabbath, but since they're elective procedures, it'd probably be hard to find a doctor that would perform them on Saturday anyway. Like I mentioned earlier, it's about resting and not working. As we discussed, our brother Judah has set up many rules governing what does and does not constitute work, and therefore what can and cannot be done on the Sabbath. I first try and determine if it's something I want to do or not. Washing the dishes is an example. I have no desire to wash dishes, and I'm pretty sure Chris doesn't either. We consider that work, so we do our best to get the kitchen cleaned up before Sabbath starts. If we're not successful, we just leave it till Sabbath's over. I will, however, help her clean up when Sabbath's done. I will, however, help to clean up after Sabbath service at a congregation like this. This might seem hypocritical to some, but I think about the priests in the temple times. Butchering animals is very physical, yet the Pharisees routinely sacrificed animals on the Sabbath. In fact, they were commanded to sacrifice animals on the Sabbath. And like butchering, sacrificing an animal was work, yet they were allowed, even commanded to do so. What made it okay was that the work was being done in service to Yahweh. Matthew 12:5. Or did you not read that in the Torah that on the Sabbath priests in the set-apart place profane the Sabbath and are blameless? So once again, that's Yeshua coming on top of it and saying, yeah, it may, what they're doing may look like a bunch of work, but it's okay because of why it's being done. People tell us we're putting ourselves in bondage to the law. On the contrary, I feel that the law is freeing. It gives us the authority to rest and not have to do the work that we don't want to do on the Sabbath. You're actually given a biblical excuse not to have to get out in the heat and clean out the yard and do stuff because it's Sabbath. You need to rest. Many people new to Torah pursuance ask if they should quit their jobs if they cannot get Sabbath off. I always answer the decision everyone has to make for themselves. I won't find fault with anyone for not quitting or staying. Who knows what plan Yahweh has for each of us? I do counsel people to make an honest and genuine effort to get the Sabbath off. Go to your employer and ask. Tell them why. Offer to work other shifts that are undesirable to others. I know people who have done this and have been very blessed and been given Sabbath off. Once again, these are my convictions that I have come to and have not claimed to perfectly keep Sabbath all the time. We're all works in progress and slip up sometimes. We're not perfect, and that's why we need a Savior. In this the talk, I've made references to our brother Judah and how they sometimes take extreme measures on rules they observe and attempts to be sure that they don't profane the Sabbath. Please understand, I'm in no way trying to bash them and do not mean to sound like I'm berating them. I'm grateful for everything they have done throughout the years to guard the Torah. Without them, we would not have the knowledge and understanding of the desires of our Father that we have today. Yahweh bless.